Hello there, and welcome to today's webinar on managing the risks of doing business with third parties. I'm Nick Henderson, Vinciworks' Director of Learning and Content, and today we're joined by Gary Yantin, Vinciworks' Director of Best Practice. Hi, Gary. And also by Paul Cadwallader, who is Senior Vice President of Business Development at CoreStream. Hello to you, Paul.
Hi, Nick. Great to be here, and I'm looking forward to this session.
Great to have you both with us. So now we're joined today by Paul, as we said, from CoreStream, who we work closely with here at Vinciworks. CoreStream is a leading provider of risk management technology and support to help organizations manage risk and compliance more efficiently and effectively. Since 2006, CoreStream have been helping companies through consultancy and a highly intuitive and flexible technology platform to manage risk and compliance. The CoreStream platform is used by the BBC, NHS England, Great Western Railways, and more. Paul is a high-energy, experienced business leader and a former Big Four partner who specializes in developing enterprise software capabilities to solve real-world risk and compliance business problems and taking these capabilities to market to serve clients. His specific focus is in the domains of governance, risk, compliance control, and assurance. And we're delighted to have you with us today, Paul. So we're talking about third-party risk management. Tell us briefly, how does CoreStream help with managing the risks of doing business with third parties?
So our third-party risk management solution uses the highly intuitive and flexible CoreStream platform, recently reviewed by market-leading GRC analysts with the feedback that it was agile, intuitive, value-creating, effective, and adaptable. The flexibility of our platform enables us to give each and every client exactly what they want for their third-party risk management approach. This allows process step ordering and the features each organization wants, including workflows, risk scoring models, risk surveys, and a pick and mix approach to which data sources they want to use. The TPRM solution includes the following key features: the segmentation of third parties based on your risk model, workflow that triggers different levels of assessment based on the risk profile of that third party questionnaires and data request forms, sanctions and adverse media screening and monitoring, deep dive due diligence across all risk domains, utilizing numerous data sources that you can choose, and then the reporting and dashboards showing overall risk ranking by third party.
Fantastic. Well, it sounds like a great solution.
We also provide e-learning at Vinciworks, and along with our partners at Skill Boosters and Compliance Office, we provide a full range of e-learning software solutions on all sorts of compliance topics like anti-money laundering, anti-bribery, and we also provide support for compliance departments within law firms as well. Yeah. So it's a huge range of compliance topics. I'd probably say there's almost no gaps in the GRC.
Let's now look at how risk management interacts with the idea of third-party risk management and also the concept of vendor risk management as well. Paul, give us some background to start with. What exactly does third-party risk management and vendor risk management cover? What does it mean?
Okay, so the modern organization is not defined by bricks and mortar walls and traditional employees anymore. The modern organization is the extended enterprise of third-party and nth-party relationships. And that terminology is definitely expanding and continuously evolving. Third parties are becoming part of an organization's enterprise and forming that extended enterprise. The suppliers, vendors, outsourcers, service providers, contractors, consultants, temporary workers, brokers, agents, dealers, partners, and more. And they're part of your organization. There's no longer that black and white border to your organization. It's shades of gray. Mm-hmm. Even the smallest organization can have dozens of relationships that they depend on for goods, services, processes, and transactions. In large organizations, this can expand to tens of thousands of third-party relationships with suppliers, vendors, partners, and service providers.
That's obviously an awful lot for any business to manage. And as you said, there can be hundreds, potentially thousands even of third-party relationships to deal with here. I think particularly now it's quite challenging when we're all dealing with an increasingly complex supply chain. So how does governance, risk, and compliance fit into the concept of third-party risk management?
So with businesses increasingly relying on that complex network of third-party relationships to thrive, the governance, risk management, and compliance, so the GRC, of third-party relationships becomes even more critical. Without effective GRC, organizations will fail to manage uncertainty, avoid disruptions, act with integrity, and achieve business objectives. An organization can face reputational and economic disaster by establishing or maintaining the wrong business relationships, or by allowing good business relationships to sour because of weak governance. Third-party problems are the organization's problems and directly impact the brand as well as reputation, increasing exposure to risk and compliance matters. So when questions of delivery, business practice, ethics, privacy, safety, quality, human rights, resiliency, corruption, security, and the environment arise, the organization is held accountable, and it must ensure that the third-party partners behave appropriately. So the business's ability to reliably achieve their corporate objectives directly depends on the governance of third-party relationships and whether the organization has established the right relationships and can reliably achieve objectives in those relationships. So the organization's ability to manage the uncertainty, the risk, and the resilience in that relationship requires that the objectives, the values, and the risks all be managed together with regards to third parties.
Certainly a lot from the GRC side to consider, I think, when it comes to risk management and this wider network of third parties and the wider extended enterprise network of the business. And Gary, I know you've been working with the legal industry for decades now on risk management and due diligence, which is second nature to law firms, really. So how does the legal industry deal with risk? And maybe what lessons could we take from the legal industry for those of us who are not in the legal industry and learn from them?
I'm not sure if it's decades, but definitely been around the legal industry for a number of years, Nick. But it's interesting because legal is mandated by law to consider all sorts of risks, and I think it's kind of hard baked into their psyche to be thinking about a risk-based approach to lots of different things. When they're taking on a new client, we're doing risk-based due diligence on that client. The nature of the client, the nature of the transaction, the nature of the money flow of where the funds and the source of wealth is coming from. So I think law firms, in the most part, have that already inbuilt. And that translates into third-party risks as well, and potentially also their own supply chain, but also the client supply chain. So dealing with risk-based due diligence focuses on making sure that the due diligence that you apply reflects the relative risk faced by the matter. And I think for third-party relationships, it's also really important. You can't implement the same due diligence across an organization for any two matters. They're not going to be the same. No relationship is going to be exactly the same. If you're dealing with a huge international shipping company, they're not posing the same risk as a local family-run supplier. So having a risk-based approach means that you're going to be thinking about it in a bit more detail and perhaps making sure that you're actually applying the right level of analysis to the risk that you're facing.
What kind of issues are law firms actually considering when they're looking at risk-based due diligence for their own firms?
Most of the things that Paul mentioned earlier, I think the GRC stable of issues: anti-bribery, corruption, obviously anti-money laundering being used by bad people to do bad things and be the conduit in that, whether that's clients or people in the supply chain. It could be the same thing. Tax evasion, so Criminal Finances Act, certainly for the UK, comes into play. Modern slavery is an issue, certainly for the very big organizations that are obliged to look after, to check modern slavery in their supply chain. But we see that filtering down now as well into smaller firms. Data security, cyber security, obviously sanctions is a big issue at the moment for everybody. It's changing on a daily basis. And all compliance topics really relevant to third-party relationships, I think, will help in making sure that you do risk-based due diligence properly. And if you follow a process to understand that party, conduct a risk assessment, provide a score to the risk, make sure you undertake the right level of due diligence, I think that helps to provide a good level of protection and assurance for the organization, to make sure that the person you're doing business with, or the organization that you're doing business is a good party to work with.
So Paul, how would we define then risk-based due diligence for a non-law firm context, for a corporate?
So I think we first of all need to look at the definition of GRC. So that official definition is about the capability to reliably achieve objectives. So that's the governance dimension. Address uncertainty, the risk management, and then act with integrity, so the compliance aspect. So as an organization, you will set objectives to deliver to your customers and achieve quality and be responsible and comply with regulations and many other objectives. So what we do is think from a risk-based due diligence point of view, is look at where the risks are to achieving those objectives when working with our chosen third parties, or we want to work with third parties. And how we prioritize due diligence, given we will only have finite resources, we don't have unlimited resources to go and do to go and do that DD. So those that are likely to pose the biggest risk, so the most uncertainty to achieving our objectives, are the ones where we do the most due diligence.
Yeah, certainly a worthwhile lesson to remember, is we don't have finite resources, and actually we do need to prioritize when it comes to due diligence. Now, Gary, what are the particular risk factors that we should be considering with third parties? What's the kind of detail of that?
Yeah, I suspect the list is never ending, and if we're doing risk based, then you have to be looking at all sorts of things specific to that client and that service that you're procuring. But it's the same as really for clients. The location of the person you're doing business with, the industry they're in, the background to the business, the identity of the business, what kind of organization is it? If it's a limited company, you've got certain perhaps some shortcuts to get information about that business. If it's an individual, then you probably want to go into the background a little bit more detail. I think then you get into a bit more specific things like the relationship they have with other customers they're doing business with. Who else are they providing services to? Maybe, if they're providing services to government entities, that's something to look at. The structure of the proposed relationship. Are you a big client to them, a small client to them? Are you going to be doing a joint venture with them, or committing to a certain spend with them? And the scope of the services. So how critical are they to your business? And you need to look at all of those sorts of factors, and probably many more. Yeah. But you want to look at them holistically, so not just in isolation and say, well, one is ticked, so we're good on that, but we'll ignore something else. And on the other hand, just because something is flagged, it's not always an automatic no, but they are the sorts of things that you should be taking a deeper look at. So from the legal industry point of view, the nature of the risk relates to the type of due diligence that gets undertaken. Certainly, if someone is low risk, you might conduct just basic searches on the internet, check on the usual databases, verify that their policies are up to date. And you can conduct that by looking at the business itself. If someone's medium risk, that you've done your initial risk analysis and you decide they're medium risk to you, then more advanced data collection, checking those policies in more detail, not just are they up to date and when were they last reviewed, but are they fit for purpose? Do they fit in with the policies that you've got in place for your business? You might start conducting interviews with that third party. You might be looking at other people that might be using the third party and seeing what they think of them. Get input from your compliance team, your procurement team, your legal team, and so on. So not just leaving this as a risk management department issue or for the general counsel. And then as you go further up the list, if you're looking at something that you deem to be high risk, then more data collection, more audit trail, more confirmation that you've actually really investigated the risk of working with this organization. Maybe now you should be going to visit them at their premises, doing spot checks. We're going to be coming on to talk about things like continual checks on the supplier. So those sorts of things, going into a bit more detail if you consider them to be high risk.
That's a great summary, Gary. And actually, I can see someone just asked a question, about what defines a supplier, and does, for instance, getting stationery count? What about the phone company? And I think that's a great example of what would be a very low risk supplier. A phone company usually is a very large entity, so you can, as long as the invoices that you're receiving from the phone company will match up with actually who you expect to be sending the company sending those invoices, then you can probably tick that off as being low risk. You don't actually need to worry about it too much. But actually,
and it's like Paul said before. It's about resource, right? It's about the finite resource compared to how important this is. How important are you to them as a client, and how important are they to you as a supplier? That's going to influence your risk approach.
And so, Paul, talk us through what's the actual process then for undertaking a risk assessment. Let's say, someone's not been doing this regularly or is new to the concept of risk-based due diligence on the supply chain. What are the steps that they should be taking?
Sure. Okay. So to perform risk assessments across all of your third parties or potential third parties, you cannot take the same approach to every third party, as that would be quite time consuming and expensive. Especially say if you're running a tender process, you want to make sure who, not only are they responding to the tender, but what comes out the other end, you want to do business with them and they're safe to do business. So it may not be every third party you actually finally engage with that you need to do this for. And therefore you need to prioritize, because you only have finite resources. So at the simplest level, you need to segment your third parties into risk segments. And there are different orders you can do things in. But what I'm going to walk through is a typical one that we will see a lot of organizations starting with. So first of all, it's about checking the third party against watch lists. So that's really about verifying they're not a sanctioned party and you can actually do business with them. Mm-hmm. Sources of those of that information will often be, subscription based. There are open sources, but it's quite complicated in terms of various different entity structures and dimensions. So subscribing to a data source can often make that far easier. But you want to check the ownership structure first as well, because the entity you may be engaging with may be fine, but their ultimate owner may be sanctioned, and then that's a no-no in terms of actually engaging with them. So once you've checked you can do business with that third party, you then want to typically assess the risk of the specific service or product you're buying, including consideration of the location, because that may alter the risk profile. Because to your business, a global vendor, a big vendor, has differing profiles across jurisdictions for differing services, and you need to take that into consideration. So the risk profile of that service or product, you'll consider a variety of risk domains. And what I mean by that is topics like anti-bribery, data privacy, modern slavery, cyber, environmental, the list goes on. And you can automate that and simplify that through specific questions and categorization in software. A really simple example would be, if you're going to outsource your payroll, you want to really focus on topics around privacy and cyber, for example, because of what that organization is going to be doing on your other hand, versus buying your stationery is going to be generally low risk, versus dealing with a sales agent in another country to help expand your global footprint. You're going to want to focus on things like anti-bribery and so forth. Yeah. So depending on what it is you're doing, you need to think about the different risk domains. Now, typically the next stage, if you've determined that actually what you're doing is not stationery, but it's payroll, for example, it's higher risk, you want to then use a combination of adverse media, looking back typically over 3 years, maybe 5 years, and other data sources, depending on what it is you're looking at. There are specialist data sources you can use which can advise on things like ESG ratings, cybersecurity ratings, and then you can also send questionnaires to the third party as well, to get a view of the risk exposure and how well things are controlled. Some organizations do just rely on questionnaires, although that is increasingly becoming uncommon. So yes, you've got something that might stand up in the event of later legal action or something like that, because they said certain things that may become not true, but the damage has already been done to your reputation as an organization. So triangulating that with data sources to independently verify a few things is definitely the trend in the market in terms of using those things. Now, the information from these sources can be mostly automated, and you can do it without obtaining that information from the third party, so by using the various different databases. And you can bring that together to then formulate a view of risk. So you've got the inherent risk of what you're buying, outsourcing payroll, say. The third party, do they have any history of losing data, being hacked, and so forth? And then you can come out with effectively a final risk score, which will help you determine whether you're going to take on and work with that third party. There are many other things you can do. You can go and do then on-site audits and different things, and I've seen pop up into the into the chat in the questions around, can you use ISAE reports? So those are known as service auditor reports. Yes, you can, but remember, an ISAE report like a 3402 is specific to a given topic, like financial controls. So it will help you understand those kind of things around that particular topic, but don't just rely on an ISAE report, because you've got to think about the other risk domains that the third party could pose risk to you for. So fundamentally, everything I've outlined is about a funnel. What you're trying to do is work out the third parties you need to do more due diligence on, because what you're buying or who they are riskier, or where the services are happening, and then you just funnel it down to then get to your decision point as to what you look at. Now, you typically use a software solution to support you in that process that I've outlined. You can cut back the amount you do, but fundamentally the principles of funneling your due diligence to the highest risk remains the same. You just need to make sure that you identify those third parties and the services and products with the highest risk to your organization, and then focus your effort on those.
But if we're looking at this just from a manual point of view, Paul, what kind of data should we be collecting from third parties at this risk assessment stage? What are the things that we're asking them to give to us?
To be honest, Nick, I think it's as much as possible so that you can get the best insight to perform the best risk assessment. That's generally the approach. However, that's rarely practical, because third parties get asked this all the time, and therefore you want to minimize the friction at the outset of any new relationship. Therefore, smart and targeted questions in the questionnaire, so it has branch logic, so effectively it dynamically unpacks the questions, so you ask different questions based on previous answers, and asking evidence as you go through that is a very smart way to do it. But supplementing that with external data sources is always advisable. Enables you to validate some of those information points from the third party, as well as enrich it with those external trusted sources. It gives you the better insight into the risks you face as an organization. And I've seen some questions pop up around, what sources can be used for different things. I mean, there's a whole variety. You can plug these into a solution so it's automatically driven through an API, or you can buy subscriptions and access them through like a web portal. And that can be anything from the likes of Exeger, the Moody's empire with RDC and the BVD products, that's the Bureau van Dijk products, Dun & Bradstreet, Dow Jones, the list goes on and on and on. Each of them have got pros and cons depending on what you want to get from them. And then you've got specialist ones like BitSight and Security Scorecard, and Qualys around the kind of cyber side, EcoVadis for sustainability, ESG rating, and so forth. And so there's lots of different ones, and it depends on what you're wanting to gain as insight in terms of the data.
And certainly good to keep in mind how you're going to actually handle and store all this data. If you're asking lots of suppliers for lots of information, what are you actually going to do to manage? How are you going to manage that? And Gary, I know from the law firm side, they often go through this process of verifying and validating data that they get in, rather than just, they don't just trust it straight away. How do they go about that? How will they validate and verify that something is accurate?
Yeah, well, I hope that people verify the data they get in rather than just rely on the questions that are answered. And I think firms do that for client due diligence, certainly. They're not just relying on someone saying they are who they are. They're looking at ID documents and things behind that to make sure that that's true. And they should be doing that as well for supplier due diligence. They should be checking that the answers that they're given are correct, and that the answer, the evidence can back up the information, especially if a vendor's been designated as high risk or medium risk. If they're low risk, like the example we gave before, if you're buying stationery from a high street retailer, if you're dealing with your phone services, that's one thing. But where you're dealing with someone that is telling you something about their systems, that whether they're certified or whether they've got different policies, then I think you should be looking for clarification that those things are true, or conducting interviews, site visits, whatever you need to do to address any issues that you feel uncomfortable about or that you don't have any confirmation on, for sure.
And certainly I think it'd be a bit of a red flag if you were seeing inconsistencies from a supplier even at that stage.
Yeah, that's part of the due diligence and the risk-based approach, is to spot those inconsistencies and see what's happening, or have your software flagging up where the inconsistencies are. And that's why we're seeing so much pressure on the supply chain. You can look back at what happened with PPE over the last couple of years. And not being able to deliver what people said they could do. That's a supply chain issue. So people contracting with a supplier who couldn't deliver what they promised. So maybe taking a bit longer to do your due diligence, backing it up, having a system in place, having software in place that actually does it properly, is worth the investment in the long run to make sure these things don't cause you a risk.
So what do you do next then? Once you're happy with all the information you've got in, what's the next step in the process?
Well, that's when you make your judgment. You check if there are any red flags. You check if it's good to go ahead and enter into that contract, and make sure that you're protecting yourself from them. Look and see if there are any red flags. Is there sufficient capacity? Are there regulatory licenses needed from the third party to carry out the actions they say they're going to do? Is there anything standing in their way that they need to get done in order to fulfill their contract? Are they looking to go ahead and give you the services before you've started the contract with them? That's a pretty big red flag. Are there hesitations to provide compliance certificates that we just spoke about? If they say they're ISO certified, have they got it to back it up? Have you got proof of that? Have you got an audit trail? And then things like, does it feel right? Does it look right? Is the price too high, too low? Is it reasonable? Are you being pushed to do the contract quickly? Sometimes certainly salespeople are trying to get contracts done within a time period, so there's incentives to get them done. Is that usual? Is it unusual? How does that feel? So you've got the information, you've done your due diligence. That's when you have to start looking at everything holistically and seeing if it feels right, and if you're ready to sort of to go ahead. Because not doing it properly lies not with it normally lies with a human error. It doesn't necessarily lie with the third party. It lies with you to make sure that you've done it properly and you've conducted all of your searches appropriately. I think you need to ask these key questions when you're completing your due diligence. Has the data been gathered accurately, and is it comprehensive?
Okay.
Are the sources of that data trustworthy? Can you back them up? And is there anything you got a no to, or a maybe, or you just turned a blind eye to and thought, well, we'll just go ahead, or they've promised it's coming in the future? Is there any outstanding issues that are stopping you from entering into the contract? And if the answers to any of those questions, I'm reading them again, a no or yes, the yeses and nos, think about whether or not you should go ahead, or whether you should be going back and asking the questions again.
And if you do have concerns then, or you've got, maybe an outstanding issue, but you've ultimately decided to move forward with the supplier, or you're happy with the majority of the answers that have been given, how do you resolve those outstanding things? What do you do then to protect yourself?
Well, that's risk mitigation. That's looking at whether you're willing to take on the risk itself, so risk attitude, but also risk mitigation. What should you do if things go wrong? So clients might want to see the third party demonstrate certain things before contracting with them, or put certain conditions into the contract if it feels like there is a risk, but that risk can be managed. So you can do that pre-contract, or you can mitigate post-contract and put in place things to make sure that your risk is being assessed as you're going along and doesn't change. So managing that risk, not just entering into the contract and saying we're done. We looked at it once, we don't have to look at it again.
And also, I guess, making sure you can actually verify that whatever promises or assurances are given, that they're actually undertaken in the end. So, Paul, one question we do hear all the time is, how deep down supply chain should risk management go? How many levels and tiers down should we be looking?
So, as ever with questions like this, the answer is it depends. There's some key drivers that determine how far down your supply chain you should go. The kind of business you are and what you do. Now, that can drastically impact the degree to which different regulations apply, and can also increase the amount you're exposed to certain risk domains. The risk domains that are important to your business based on your risk appetite. So, as I mentioned before, the risk domains, things like anti-bribery and corruption, and modern slavery, worker welfare, privacy, and so forth. Now, some of those risk domains have more dependency on nth parties, so beyond your immediate third party, than other risk domains. Regulations which require to have verified there is no risk for the entirety of the supply chain can also drive that. That dimension around worker welfare and environmental is, and we'll come on to this in a little bit, is already in place in some European regulations. And there is one which is just being finalized, and it may come out by the end of this week from the European Union as a directive, which is going to look, it's a debate about value chain versus supply chain. So is it going to make you go upstream and downstream for the entirety for environmental and worker welfare? So this is gaining a lot of teeth quite quickly, and it's not just about the immediate third parties.
So let's say then you decided you wanted to go a bit deeper, perhaps because you need to follow a particular regulation, and you wanted to find out more about your supplier's supply chain. What's the process of doing that? Okay, so there's a few ways you can achieve such due diligence beyond your immediate third party, each with increasing degrees of sophistication and veracity. So you can ask your third party, how have they assessed the risk of their third parties and the risk they pose? How have they got comfortable? Now, you typically do that through the third party questionnaire, and sometimes we ask for evidence of the assessment. You can also ask your third party for their vendors, so your fourth party, and you may also take into consideration the percentage contribution of that fourth party to your third party's service or product, like 20% or greater, for example. Once you've got that fourth party details, you can then perform your own due diligence. And there are also services and capabilities out there from some vendors, which basically scrape lots of different data, some of it open source, some of it from different sources, and use artificial intelligence to effectively build up a typical tier. So they'll say, for a given car manufacturer, it's likely that this company, then this company, and this company, and this company in the tier of the supply chain. And then you can then go out and get other information like adverse media and stuff like that to help you with that entire nth party assessment. So, simple to more sophisticated ways in which it can be done. So rising cost of living, right? Rising cost of energy and commodities is causing financial health of organizations to come under pressure. And therefore, there's a risk where a business has dependency on an organization which may become insolvent. So these risks should not only be assessed at the beginning of a relationship,
but on a continual basis because the risk landscape changes.
I think it's interesting how you mentioned about the sanctions risk, and we've covered that in a lot of webinars this year. A lot of people have been asking us about it this year, the knock-on effect from Ukraine and Russia. And I think just the sheer scale of sanctions compliance, since two very large European countries have effectively been removed, or there's a red flag over them from the supply chain as a result of, of the kind of ongoing conflict. Gary, how does this interact with these other areas of compliance, like sanctions, like bribery, those sorts of things? How do these things come together?
I mean, it all comes together at the desk of the person who's dealing with risk in the organisation, be it a law firm or not a law firm. Certainly, the people I've been speaking to have been extremely occupied with sanctions over the last 6 months or so, and making sure that they can do business with the people that they wanted to do business with. Suddenly people were cut off from them, or they quite rightly didn't want to do business with them.
Yeah.
But as that becomes the new normal, other things come along, I think, and have to be part of the risk horizon, as well as just sanctions. And other risks go up, such as bribery, such as corruption, such as people trying to do business with you and move out of the sanctioned areas and try to become a clean provider to you. So you have to be aware of that and cognizant of that in your due diligence of third parties. And I think also you have to consider ongoing monitoring. Saying no at the beginning, or obviously yes at the beginning, things change as you're going along. And as Paul said, the economic outlook is changing continuously and not for the better at the moment. So that is going to increase risks as people have become more desperate to do business. So ongoing monitoring is really important to make sure you're covering off your risk profile. Looking at data privacy as well, I think that's a big area, and cyber risk. State-sponsored attacks on organizations are increasing, so make sure you've got that covered off in your supply chain and in your third-party contracts. Who's got your data? Who's got access to your data in your systems? Are they properly protected? And have you got stability in your systems? Have your vendors got stability in their systems to make sure they can continue to provide those services to you? So keep looking at it all the time. Don't just look at it once and tick the box and forget about it.
Yeah, definitely. First question to you. So the question is, we have many different processes in our business for different functions in relation to third parties. Is this okay?
An organization's risk exposure, I would say, across third-party relationships is becoming increasingly interconnected. And I've talked about that with a few examples. So risk in one area, so one function might be looking at it and say, oh, we've got a low risk from a health and safety point of view. But actually, if you look about other risk exposures for the same relationship, risk of data leakage or a cyber attack, then if you don't have that integrated approach across multiple functions, you're going to lack visibility or understanding of the scope of that risk. And those risks could be material to your organization, depending on the third party. So to overcome this, an organization has to have an integrated approach to performing those risk assessments. And it doesn't mean it has to sit in one function, but it's just about all functions being aligned on the process. Each function can still decide how they measure risk for their particular topic area, and you can use smart and dynamic workflows in the software to farm stuff out and get sign off or challenge. And so it's really about focusing on those risk domains for a given relationship and that exposure, and then deciding on who's going to look at what within an organization.
Yeah. And Gary, next question to you. You've referenced a few times about the risk assessments not just being at the beginning of a third-party relationship. How should we be doing ongoing monitoring of risk?
It's a really good question. I have mentioned it a lot. There's a lot of ways that you can do ongoing monitoring. I think it's the most important one is checking and verifying continuously the sources of information. Performance indicators as well. So you could typically use performance indicators for operational management of the relationship. For example, contractual milestones. So is there a milestone at which you're making another payment to the other party? should you be checking in again that their certifications are still correct at that point? So that will give a good indication of any movement in any risk profile, and periodic audits as well. So making sure that whatever system you're using flags up the fact that at 3 months and at 6 months you should be doing another risk assessment, and making sure that you've got up-to-date information, but also transactional data with the third party is an important indicator of looking back again and doing more ongoing monitoring.
Great, thank you very much. Well, that's about all the time we have for today. We're going to leave the chat, and thank you very much to our guests from CoreStream, to Paul and to Gary from Vinciworks. It was wonderful to have you both on. And otherwise, thank you everyone for joining us today.